Only Dante could properly describe the road from Lozengrad. Only his dark genius could recreate all of the horrors of the cold swamps out of which stick the twisted and mutilated bodies of the fallen. Bizarre bulges in the slippery mud. A close look at them, and one may identify the features of distorted faces, broken skulls, convulsed hands, and shattered teeth. Hello, and welcome to Samuel's Fortress. I'm your host, Kirill, and today we're going to be discussing the Balkan Wars. Now, the Balkan Wars and the years immediately preceding the Balkan Wars are probably the most confusing and chaotic period in modern Macedonian history. So, where we're going to start today is immediately after the Ilinden uprising of 1903. So, if you remember from a couple videos ago, in the fall of 1903, the Internal Macedonian Revolutionary Organization, or IMRO, launched a general uprising, the Ilinden uprising, in Macedonia in an attempt to liberate the territory from Ottoman rule. Now, as we discussed, this was not successful. Within a matter of a few months, the Ottomans managed to put down the Ilinden uprising, and as a result of this, the influence of the IMRO within Macedonia was severely diminished. The IMRO suffered a severe blow as a result of their defeat at the general uprising, the Ilinden uprising, and therefore this kind of creates a vacuum within the Macedonian territory in which the neighboring states can push their influence. Basically, here we're talking about the Greeks and the Serbs. So basically what the Greeks are doing is these guerrilla bands, which are under the under the influence of the patriarchist bishop Karavangelis, begin pushing into these Slavic Macedonian villages, basically trying to push out the influence of the Bulgarian Exarchist Church and introduce the influence of the Patriarchate Church. Here it's the kind of the same age-old story, the Greeks attempting to Hellenize the Macedonian Slavs. The Serbs are playing a similar game. The Serbian Chetniks are attempting to make incursions into Vardar, Macedonia. This is due to the fact that the Serbs have this irredentist claim over Vardar, Macedonia, which they view as old Serbia. In my opinion, this is not a historically justified claim, but nevertheless, that is the position of the Serbs, and they are supported by the prominent Serbian statesman Nikola Pasic. So here we see again the IMRO losing influence as a result of the failed uprising, and the Serbs and the Greeks taking advantage of this and filling the void, if you will. At the same time that this is occurring, we see here the imperial powers of Europe also vying for control of the Balkans of Macedonia. And here we're talking about Austria and Russia in particular. Now, the Austrians, along with the Germans, have imperial ambitions that are contrary to those of the Russians, who have their own imperialist projects and ambitions. And where the conflict comes here is essentially Constantinople or Istanbul. On one hand, you have the German-Austrian project, which is essentially for the German people to get into the colonialism game. Basically, they want to project imperial power outside of Europe the same way that the British and the French do. And here, what the Germans are trying to do is exert influence into the Middle East. Here, the slogan is Berlin to Baghdad. What is envisioned here is a German-Austrian-Ottoman alliance by which Berlin can be connected to Baghdad via a rail system, and this will essentially allow the Germans to push their imperial ambitions into the Middle East. Now, the reason why this conflicts with the Russian imperial project is because what the Russians are trying to do is secure naval access to the Mediterranean from the Black Sea. Basically, in order for the Russians to project hard power into the Mediterranean and beyond, they need to have free access from the Black Sea, which is where the majority of the Russian naval forces, into the Mediterranean. And in order to do this freely, the Russians need control of the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles. Basically, they need control of Istanbul, of Constantinople. So we see here how both the Germanic project and the Russian project require Constantinople, and therefore these two imperial projects are in conflict with one another. So this is another thing to be aware of during this time period is not only are there local states competing for power in the Balkans, but you have regional powers, European imperial powers, also vying for influence as another layer on top of the local conflict. Now, to make things even more complicated, while this is all going on, we see here an internal revolution, internal instability within the Ottoman Empire itself, amongst the Turks. And what I'm talking about here is the Young Turk Revolution of 1908. So, to kind of back up a little bit, from the late 18th century, we see these waves of secular and liberal revolutions kind of spreading throughout Europe, starting with the French Revolution in the late 18th century. And eventually this kind of secular, liberal, revolutionary idea of setting up constitutional republics as opposed to these kind of more monarchical conservative states, this idea reaches the Turks, and the Turks end up forming an organization called the Committee of Union and Progress, or the Ottoman Committee of Union and Progress, which we more commonly refer to as the Young Turks. So the OCUP, CUP, Young Turks, that's kind of all the same thing. And what the CUP, the Committee of Union and Progress, does is it kind of formulates its revolutionary struggle. It bases its revolutionary struggle against the Sultan and this Islamic monarchy on the French Revolution. The Young Turks even use slogans such as liberté, égalité, fraternité, like the French during the French Revolution. And again, they're trying to set up a constitutional republic within the Ottoman realm. Now, at the beginning, the CUP, or the Young Turks, has the support of the IMRO. Basically, the IMRO and the CUP kind of view themselves as fighting for the same cause, which is the overthrow of the Sultan Abdul Hamid. And here the CUP, like I said, they're fighting along with the IMRO. They're using the same tactics as the IMRO. And eventually this Young Turk revolution is successful. And I should say that kind of it's really the more radical left-wing elements within the IMRO, such as Janez Sandanski, who are kind of the most enthusiastic for this kind of Young Turk project, this secular liberal project of the Young Turks. It's not only Sandanski, but he's kind of the main guy who's kind of enthusiastically supporting the Young Turks, the CUP. Now, this alliance between the Young Turks and the IMRO is short-lived. What happens is, after a series of revolutions, counter-revolutions, the Young Turks manage to kind of secure power in Istanbul, and they're kind of leading the, leading the show, if you will, within Istanbul. Now, what occurs, like what occurred in France, and it's not a surprise given that this Young Turk Revolution is based on the French Revolution, is once the Young Turks come to power, things kind of descend into revolutionary terror. The Young Turks very quickly change their ideology, which before was, again, liberty, equality, fraternity, kind of setting up this utopian idea that all the ethnic and religious groups within the Ottoman Empire will come together and have a unified state, which everyone will be equal, and so on and so forth. Once the Young Turks come into power, this idea is quickly abandoned, and instead, they move towards a policy of Turkification. Basically, instead of securing equality and liberty for the Christian population and the non-Turkish ethnic groups, what they do is kind of begin a genocidal campaign of homogenization. Basically, what the Young Turks are trying to do is eliminate the ethnic and religious differences and create a secular Turkish identity. And here what they're doing is kind of shutting down and repressing the cultural and religious institutions of the Balkan people, of these various organizations of the Christians, the churches, so forth. They are launching kind of a genocidal campaign in order to kind of diminish or destroy the ethnic and religious character of the non-Turkish population. Now, here in Chris Anastasov's work, The Tragic Peninsula, Professor Anastasov kind of details what exactly is occurring here in this period once the CUP takes power, once the Young Turks control the empire. Now, quoting from Anastasov, in the mind of the founders of the OCUP, or the Young Turk Party, was something of more definite and far-reaching aspect. They were to be the new exponents of Islam against the interfering Christian powers. Ahmed Riza Bey's ideal was the fusion of all races of the empire, Muslims and Christians, into a, quote, new nation with a centralized government modeled after the French system. The new Ottoman Empire was to be formed by an amalgamation of all the races thereof and secured from European interference by its military strength. Anastasov goes on to write a few pages later, quote, the assimilation of the heterogeneous populations could only be effected slowly, regardless of how severe might be the measures threatening the future existence of the various nationalities. The leaders of the OCUP wished to destroy their enemy, the Christian subject races, while they were still in power. Since the national rivalries in Macedonia offered an ever-ready pretext for the intervention of the powers, the Young Turks decided to put an end to the question with all possible celerity. At the name of Allah, every knee was to bow. The process of assimilation or Turkification was to be forced by every form of outrage and persecution. In Macedonia and Thrace, in the Aegean Islands, and along the coast of Asia Minor, writes Dr. Gibbons, the bishops and clergy suffered untold persecution. Some were even assassinated. I shall never forget a memorable interview I had with Yakim III. They treat us like dogs, he cried. Never under Abdul Hamid or any sultan have my people suffered as they are suffering now. But we are too strong for them. We refuse to be exterminated. I see all of Europe stained with blood because of this. So here we see that the Young Turks are no friend to the Christian and non-Turkish elements within the empire. Now, in order to prevent any rebellion against this genocidal project of the Young Turks, they begin a process of disarmament. So here Anastasov writes, quote, during the period of disarmament, a systematic search was instituted in Macedonia, which had for its main object the discovery of arms hidden in villagers' houses. While the disarmament campaign was carried on, 4,913 Bulgarians in the vilayets of Monastir, Salonika, and Skopje were tortured, and a considerable number of them either died or remained permanently maimed. More than 2,000 persons fled to Bulgaria, and about the same number sought refuge in the mountains. The dreadful situation was the main cause of the reappearance of the IMRO. The latter once more assumed its former methods of combat against the chauvinistic new regime of Turkey. So this disarmament campaign leads to conflict between the Macedonians and the Turks, and reignites IMRO's opposition to Istanbul. And here we see a new conflict between the two states reemerge. Here a little bit later on, we see Chris Anastasov detail what occurs between IMRO and the Young Turks. He writes, quote, to augment the chaos of the country, the Young Turks began to use other brutal methods. Local secret Turkish bands fostered by the government began to kill the Macedonian Bulgarian revolutionists from ambushes. The leaders of the Bulgarian revolutionary bands of the IMRO, who were loyal and earnestly assisted the Young Turks in their efforts to overthrow Abdul Hamid, were now subject to extermination. A considerable number of the outstanding leaders of IMRO were assassinated. The situation was further aggravated by the Muslim colonists, who were brought from Bosnia and Herzegovina by the Turkish government to force the Bulgarian peasants from the lands of their fathers, grandfathers, and great-grandfathers. Such conditions favored the reappearance of the former inclination on the part of the people to resort to an armed struggle. As a consequence, the IMRO once more began its conspiratorial work. Thousands of Macedonian members of the IMRO took to the mountains. Their work now consisted chiefly in the placing of bombs along the railway lines and government institutions. So here we see the revolutionary struggle reignite, and IMRO engages the Young Turks. Now, it's not just the Macedonian guerrillas, the IMRO, that engaged the Turkish government. Here we see a formal alliance being formed between Serbia and Bulgaria. The two states have had enough of the Turks, to be quite frank, and start hashing out an agreement by which they will form an alliance that will expel the Turks once and for all from Europe. Now, The problem with this alliance between the Serbs and the Bulgarians is the disagreement between the two on what should happen to Macedonia. The Bulgarians wish to have Macedonia in its entirety liberated and to form an autonomous Macedonia, which will either join Bulgaria the way Eastern Rumelia did or form a second autonomous Macedonian state. So that is kind of the goal of the Bulgarians. The Bulgarians do not wish to partition Macedonia. They want it intact. And this is also the goal of the IMRO, is a fully liberated and autonomous Macedonia. The Serbs, on the other hand, couldn't care less about the autonomy of Macedonia. They just simply wished to secure as much of the territory for themselves as they could. And then after a lot of back and forth, the Bulgarians and the Serbs come to an agreement on a partition of Macedonia if autonomy cannot be secured by the Bulgarians. So what this agreement looks like that's entered into, I'll show you here this map in Chris Anastasov's book, is this is a map of Macedonia. You can see here, it's going to be a little bit difficult given the way this map is drawn. It's a little old-fashioned, but this, just so you get an idea, that's Skopje, that's Kumanovo, Tetovo, Gostivar, Debar, Kičevo, Struga. This is kind of the northwest kind of portion of Vardar, Macedonia. Here we have Kratovo, Kočani, Štip, Veles, Prilep, Ohrid, Manastir, and these are the Aegean cities right there. So if you can see, there's a portion of this northwest part of Macedonia that is this kind of shaded in territory. Now, what this represents is what's referred to as the contested zone. So what the Bulgarians and the Serbs agree to is that everything up here, basically northern Albania and Kosovo, which are under Ottoman rule at this time, will belong to Serbia. The majority of Macedonia will go to Bulgaria. Now, this contested zone, somewhere in this area will be the Serbian-Bulgarian border. That's kind of left up to the Russian Tsar Nicholas II to determine after the conflict is finished, after the Ottomans are defeated, after the Turks are defeated. What the plan is that the Serbs and the Bulgarians will approach the Russian Tsar for arbitration, and the Russian Tsar, based on what is fair, will decide where the border is between the Serbs and the Bulgarians in Macedonia. However, what is agreed to is that regardless of where the border ends up being, it will not go past this hard line. This black line, you can see here, this kind of dashed line that kind of cuts off this northwestern portion of Macedonia. It's agreed that the Serbs, under no circumstances, will cross this line. This will be at most what the Serbians will get. This will be the least. Somewhere in here will probably be the border, but under no circumstances is the Serbian state to go beyond this territory. So that is the initial agreement between Serbia and Bulgaria. Now, Bulgaria also enters into an agreement with Greece, an alliance with Greece for the against the Ottomans, against the Turks. But no agreement is made as far as territorial distributions between the Bulgarians, and the Greeks. It's because the Bulgarians really don't think the Greeks will be able to take over any significant portions of Macedonia. The Bulgarian military is much more, it's larger, it's much more militarized, it's much more powerful. So the Bulgarians think they'll be able to secure the remainder of Macedonia aside from this kind of northwest portion. They don't think it'll be a problem kind of securing Thessaloniki and Aegean Macedonia. So no discussion is had with the Greeks about territorial division. Simply an anti-Ottoman alliance is formed. Also, the Bulgarians enter into an informal, unwritten agreement with Montenegro, basically an alliance against the Ottomans. So here we have the Balkan League, or the Balkan Alliance, being formed. Montenegro, Serbia, Bulgaria, and Greece all unifying in the sense of an alliance against the Ottomans. Now, what occurs is in October of 1912, war is declared. The first country to declare war against Turkey is Montenegro, but shortly thereafter, all other states, Serbia, Bulgaria, and Greece, they also declare war on Turkey, and the First Balkan War begins in, like I said, October of 1912. Now, what is occurring here is Montenegro and Serbia are kind of jointly invading northern Albania, the territory of modern northern Albania. The Serbs are pushing into Kosovo and this northwestern portion of Vardan, Macedonia, and that's kind of the the Serbian plan is to kind of push down from the north. The Greek plan is the same, but from the other direction. The Greeks will be pushing up into Macedonia, going towards Thessaloniki. At the same time, the Greeks will be forming a naval blockade in the Aegean Sea in order to secure the region from Turkish reinforcements. Basically, the Greek Navy will make sure that the Turks are not able to bring reinforcements across the Aegean into Macedonia. So that's what the Greeks are up to. And then the Bulgarians, who are by far the largest military force and do the majority of the fighting during the First Balkan War, they have kind of two fronts. The Bulgarians will move west into Macedonia, trying to secure the Macedonian territory as much as possible. But the majority of the Bulgarian force will actually be directed towards the east, towards the Thracian front, where the majority of the Turkish forces are, and they will attempt to push the forces of the Ottoman Empire, to push the Turks back across the Bosphorus, push them out of Europe and into Asia Minor, once kind of liberating Europe from the Ottomans once and for all. Now, the main prize of the Balkan War will be Thessaloniki. Who will control Thessaloniki will control Macedonia. And here we're really talking about a race between Greece and Bulgaria to see who will reach the city first. And here I'm going to be quoting Misha Glenny in the Balkans. And regarding this race for Thessaloniki, Glenny writes, quote, "The Greek and Bulgarian forces were desperate to reach the city first. Salonika was the single greatest prize of the First Balkan War, and there had been no prior agreement about its status. In this case, the possession would count for all of the law. Constantine and the troops under his command beat the Rila division by a matter of hours. As he strolled into Salonika, the Greek inhabitants swamped the city in blue and white colors. Accompanying him was Theoktistos, the patriarch of Athens, who joined the metropolitan of Salonika, Gennadios, in celebrating a special mass in the church of St. Minas. Glory to the triumph of the Hellenes and the venerated crown prince, proclaimed Gennadios. Hosanna to the glorious sons of the warriors of Marathon and Salamina, the valiant liberators of our fatherland. Of all the allies, Greece has suffered the least casualties, human and material, during the First Balkan War, and had walked off with its greatest prize. For the Greeks, this was a good war." So we see here that unfortunately, the Bulgarians did not manage to reach Salonika first as expected, and this is really due to the fact that the Greeks faced no major, I shouldn't say they faced no Turkish opposition, but certainly not to the extent that the Bulgarians did. The Greeks kind of managed to move up pretty quickly, much more quickly than the Bulgarians expected, and therefore the Greeks reached Salonika first and managed to kind of establish control over Aegean Macedonia as a result. Now, as mentioned, the main Bulgarian forces are directed towards the east, and here we see major battles such as Lozengrad, Chatalja, and Adrianople. These are kind of the major cities in Ottoman Thrace, and this is where the majority of the fighting occurs between the Bulgarians and the Turks. And here I'll quote from Misha Glenny regarding this Thracian front, quote, "When in late October 1912, Bulgarian forces surrounded the fortress of Lozengrad, their first tactical target, von der Goltz, the German field marshal who was supporting the Turkish forces, dismissed the assault. Lozengrad is one of the best fortresses in the world, he announced. There is no need to strengthen it, as it is unassailable as Gibraltar. It can only be stormed under two conditions. First, it must be besieged for 3 months. Secondly, the besieging army would have to be Prussian. 3 days later, however, Lozengrad fell to the Bulgarians." So we see here an underestimation of the Bulgarian forces by the Turks and their German allies. In fact, I think the French Minister of War after this Battle of Lozengrad was extremely impressed at the Bulgarians and stated that he would choose 100 Bulgarians over any European army as far as being his allies. So here we see basically the French acknowledging the heroic struggle of the Bulgarians and the strength of the Bulgarian forces during the First Balkan War. Now we move on beyond Lozengrad to Chitalja, which is a city very close to Istanbul. And here Glenny writes, the assault on Chitalja began in the early morning of the 17th of November. It was the most spectacularly violent event in the Balkan Wars. Some 900 Bulgarian guns let loose their shells on the Turkish defenses, creating a dense fog of smoke and explosion on the front of about 50 kilometers, from the Dirkos forest to the Black Sea down to Chitalja. Eyewitnesses describe the force of the attack as resembling a mighty earthquake. The noise and the smoke was audible and visible 32 kilometers away in Istanbul, where panic seized the inhabitants. Christian and Muslims alike were convinced that the Bulgarians would soon enter Istanbul to return Constantinople to the Christian world. Abdul Hamid fled the capital, the first and last time an Ottoman sultan had ever left Istanbul under duress. So we see here a shocking, rapid advancement of the Bulgarians through Thrace and them laying siege basically to the outskirts of Istanbul. Now, Glenny goes on to write, in place of the massive battle which everyone feared, an armistice was arranged. The Bulgarians made huge territorial gains, but their armed forces were stretched to the limit. In addition to growing tensions between the Bulgarians and their Serb and Greek allies over the division of spoils in Macedonia had alarmed the government in Sofia. So basically what Glenny says here is, one, the Bulgarians are probably a little stretched too thin to actually mount a direct assault on Istanbul. But the main reason why they can't do this is because the Greeks and the Serbians kind of betray them in Macedonia and do not stick to the, here we're talking about primarily about Serbia, do not stick to the pre-war agreement. So before we get to that, however, this kind of Serbian treachery, if you will, I do want to just acknowledge the role that the Macedonians play in this Thracian front with the Bulgarian forces. And here, Chris Anastasov writes, the Bulgaro-Macedonians were in, excuse me, the Bulgaro-Macedonians who were in Bulgaria as refugees prior to the war formed battalions of volunteers and offered themselves at the disposal of the Bulgarian General Staff. The Macedono-Adrianople Volunteer Corps, composed a regiment of 15,000 men, was made up entirely of Macedonian and Thracian Bulgars. The regiment was engaged in the battlefields of Thrace and elsewhere, and distinguished itself in the capture of Yavar Pasha and his army as prisoners of war near Merhamli. These Macedonian volunteers fought desperately against the Turks and were credited for numerous daring successes. So we see here that the Macedonians are actually fighting alongside the Bulgarians in the Balkan Wars. So that being said, let's move on to what the Serbs are doing. So as we just went over, the Serbs were supposed to stick to this hard line established by the agreement between the Bulgars and the Serbs. However, the Serbs went well beyond that line and conquered basically all of Vardar, Macedonia. The Bulgarians politely asked them to leave and to stick to the agreement they had before the war, but the Serbians refused to do so. Basically, what the Serbians have been doing this entire time is plotting against the Bulgarians. They had a secret agreement, the Serbs and the Greeks, that was formed behind the back of the Bulgarians for the partition of Macedonia. So the Greeks and the Serbs, again, have no interest in an autonomous Macedonia. They wish to divide Macedonia between themselves. Basically, the Serbs get the north half, the Greeks get the southern half, and they just want to push Bulgaria completely out of the region. So this is kind of the secret alliance that is going on between the Greeks and the Serbs against Bulgaria. And Bulgaria becomes aware of this towards the end of the First Balkan War as these kind of peace agreements are being drafted. And a lot of people will blame the Bulgarians for starting the Second Balkan War, but that's actually not the case. And it's not just because I'm pro-Bulgarian that I'm saying this. This Serbian and Greek plot against Bulgaria is evidenced within internal correspondences of Russian officials of the Russian imperial government. And what I'm talking about here is a series of letters between the Russian foreign minister and the various Russian ministers, ambassadors in the Balkans. So, for example, on March 10th of 1913, towards the end of the First Balkan War, kind of in between the two Balkan wars, we have a letter from the Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs to the Russian minister in Belgrade, in which the foreign minister writes, "We cannot help regretting that without waiting for the conclusion of peace, the Serbian government should raise a question with which we can have no sympathy, because it is in contradiction to the obligations assumed by the Serbian government." Another letter is drafted in April 17th of 1913. This one reads, quote, "The Greek and Serbian armies are being reinforced against the Bulgarian troops. Besides, it appears that special negotiations have been opened between Serbia and Greece. It is seriously rumored that an alliance between the two countries has been concluded. Please point out to the foreign minister how serious and regrettable are all these measures, which can only lead to a destruction of the Balkan alliance." Now, these letters are going back and forth between the Russian officials throughout the spring and into the summer of 1913. We have another letter here from May 27th, 1913, from the Russian foreign minister to the Russian ministers in Belgrade and Athens. This one writes, quote, "It looks as if the Serbian and Greek governments are playing a dilatory and dangerous game by professing to us their peaceful intentions, but at the same time avoiding clear and definite replies to the proposals and getting ready for a common war against Bulgaria. We must warn the two governments against the ruinous consequences of such a policy, and therefore instruct you to make the most serious representations to that of the effect of the Foreign Secretary." One more letter here, June 26th, 1913, on the eve of the Balkan War. Russian foreign minister to the Russian minister in Sofia writes, quote, "We blame Serbia for not having given us a definite answer whether she would submit to arbitration of the imperial government." So we see here, contrary to a lot of popular belief, it is the Serbian government, not the Bulgarian government, who is responsible for the Second Balkan War. Not only are the Serbs and the Greeks plotting between themselves to partition Macedonia in order to make sure that they defeat the Bulgarians in Macedonia, the Serbs and the Greeks ally with Turkey, the country they were just fighting with, and the Romanians in order for the Turks and the Romanians to attack Bulgaria from the east, therefore forcing the Bulgarians to kind of spread their defenses way too thinly and ensure that the Greeks and the Serbs will be successful in conquering Macedonia and partitioning it. Now, this war breaks out in the summer of 1913, and Bulgaria is invaded on all sides and eventually is defeated pretty quickly. It just cannot withstand this all-out attack from all of its neighbors at the same time. And Anastasov here writes, quote, "The rage of battle began on all sides of besieged Bulgaria. She was now isolated from the rest of the world. The Bulgarian army was completely exhausted from the campaign against the Turks. The Serbian and Greek armies, on the other hand, were rested and well entrenched. They were resting and preparing against Bulgaria, while the latter was using every available soldier against the Turks. Bulgaria was at a disadvantage in every respect. All the odds were against her. Fighting desperately for what was right, the Bulgarian armies began to show signs of defeat." And Bulgaria, like I said, was defeated. Anastasov writes, quote, "Bulgaria was unable to overcome the numerous adversaries. She was compelled to capitulate and to go to Bucharest to submit herself to the peace dictated by the victors. Alone, left to her own forces on the battlefield against overwhelming enemies, she found herself also isolated in the conference of Bucharest. No one asked the victors for leniency in the settlement with Bulgaria. Russia, the champion of pan-Slavism, was no longer interested in the affairs of the existing critical situation of Bulgaria. The diplomatic forces of Russia were now directed to building a powerful Serbian state, since Serbia proved to be a willing tool of their interests in the Balkans. The Treaty of Bucharest, therefore, which concluded the war amongst the former allies, the Second Balkan War, divided Macedonia between Serbia and Greece, and an insignificant part was left to Bulgaria. Not only did Bulgaria lose in Macedonia, but also in her territory by surrendering to Romania a considerable portion of Bulgarian Dobruja. Thus, the San Stefano Bulgaria was for the second time in 35 years divided, first in 1878 in Berlin and secondly in 1913 in Bucharest. While with the Treaty of Bucharest, the second division of Bulgaria, the Bulgarian nation was performed, for the first time Macedonia was partitioned. Hence, a new perplexity is added to the Bulgarian dilemma. And we will discuss this new complexity in the next episode. But until then, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.